Hola a todos. Hello, everyone. Here is David. You can also call me David. And I'm the content editor for Spanish-related issues at Babel. So I usually work in Berlin. Today I'm broadcasting from Bogota, Colombia, South America. It's great weather here, so I'm here to bring you some sunshine from Bogota. But that's enough from me. I welcome here my friend and colleague David from the US. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, David, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is our second broadcast for our Spanish Q&A series with Babel Spanish experts. As much as I can call myself an expert, I feel like David is a much better Spanish expert than I am. He's a native speaker of Spanish, and he's been working at Babel for so long, and he's so smart and so talented. So I'm really glad to be here working with him. Like David said, my name is David. I'm currently broadcasting from Tennessee in the United States, but I work typically in the New York office for Babel as a content producer. So I'm really happy to be here. We are going to give you a brief overview of what we talked about last week, and then we'll dive right into the topics for today. And please feel free, if you have any questions at any time, to comment below this live video, and we'll try to address some comments at the end. So let's just go ahead and talk about a brief summary of what we talked about last week. If you remember, or if you couldn't tune in, either is fine. We kind of gave a picture of how Spanish language learning can be a little bit different from English language learning. And it represents the idea that when you're learning a new language, you kind of have to reframe the way that you think about language learning as a whole, because there are certain constructions and expressions in Spanish that don't necessarily exist in English, and they don't have a one-to-one correlation and map back to English in a way that you would translate one word for one word. So we talked about the expressions me gusta or me gustan to express that you like something. We talked about the difference between the informal and the formal ways to talk about the word you. So there's tú, which is the informal form, and usted, which is the formal form. We talked about the more Spanish expressions like I and ik, which I means there is or there are, and then ik expresses that one must do something or that there's the need for something to be done. So the overarching theme here is that Spanish has a lot of ways to express yourself that don't necessarily exist in English. And that can be kind of tricky for people who are learning Spanish and haven't necessarily come across these contrasts, for example, these two different ways of thinking about the same idea. So that kind of leads us into our topic for today, which is the Spanish verbs meaning to know. In English, we have that one word, know, K-N-O-W, and it encompasses a wide range of definitions. You can know people, you can know facts, you can know information. But in Spanish, you actually have to distinguish between two different words that both translate back to English meaning to know. And those verbs are saber and conocer. So you can see on the screen, we have conocer and saber. And the main theme of today's episode is kind of digging into the difference between them as an example of when you're learning Spanish, how you have to kind of put into practice some of the rules that might not exist in English, but that are key to Spanish language learning. So as we get into the topic, I'll turn it back over to David to bring up some examples of sentences that we can use to talk about knowing people or places or things. And we'll see that the two verbs that we use appear in different contexts in both of the sentences.
Yeah, exactly, David. So it was an amazing introduction. Thank you. And yeah, as David mentioned, this is today's topic. We will be talking about actually 4 different verbs, but we will start with this one, which is to know. And as you can see, we use 2 verbs in Spanish, conocer and saber. And here the question, when to use conocer and when do we use saber? So let's start with the verb, with an example sentence. So let's start with the verb conocer. Conocer is an irregular verb, which means that when we say, for example, I know, you know, he knows, the form changes in Spanish. So, for instance, let's see our first example. I know my neighbors. How do we say that in Spanish? conozco a mis vecinos. And here we see the word yo in brackets. Just remember what we said last time. In Spanish, we tend to drop that word, the personal pronoun, because the verb conozco in this case is showing us that we are speaking about a person, yo, it's me. So in this case, we are using the personal pronoun yo, and we have conozco a mis vecinos. So in this case, we have the verb conocer. And we can just go deeper, and we can take another example, which is a little bit different. So let me add the sentence here, the sample sentence, so that we can know what I'm talking about. So let's keep this for later, and let's see the second example. We know the city very well. Nosotros conocemos la ciudad muy bien. So in both sentences, we use the verb conocer, as we saw. First, yo conozco, and then nosotros conocemos. If we go back to the first sentence, this is something I forgot to mention. You see that after conocer, we use a literal word, in this case, a mis vecinos, just to introduce, in this case, a person. So we use this little word with more verbs, but in this case, we say conozco mis vecinos, I know my neighbors, and we will get a bit deeper into this later. But just as a recap for this, when do we use conocer as to know in Spanish? We will use conocer when we are talking about people, mainly. So when getting to know someone or when knowing someone for a long time, we will use conocer. So it is a kind of way to establish personal relationships. This is a way also to express that we are knowing people, or to express familiarity, or even meeting. So it's kind of two people or a group of people getting together and getting to know each other. So in this case, we use conocer. But what about saber? Saber is a very useful verb in Spanish, which is also irregular, which means that the verb forms, again, change depending on the person, on the subject, or the person who is doing the action. So if we change the example to this, I know the answer, we will see that the verb changes from conocer to saber. In this case, yo sé la respuesta, or simply sé la respuesta. So this is a very basic example. I think it's easy to understand. But then let's change to this sentence. We know how to swim. Sabemos nadar. We know how to swim. So both examples, the last one and this one, are expressing a kind of knowledge or a skill that we acquire. So we know we have the knowledge, we possess the knowledge, if I know the answer. And in this case, in Spanish, there is also a situation where we use also the verb to know, just to say to know how to do something when we add a verb there. So nosotros sabemos nadar, or simple sabemos nadar.
Mhm.
So this is very useful to see how we use these like both verbs in different situations. The first conocer and the second verb saber, just to express when we are knowing, getting to know people, or when we are having the knowledge of something.
Those are really great explanations, David. I don't think I could have said it better myself. I can speak from experience as a learner of the Spanish language and not a native speaker that this was a concept that tripped me up quite a bit. Just the idea that in English we say, I know the answer, but also I know my neighbors. It doesn't matter whether you know information or you know people, you kind of use the same word for whatever situation you're in. So I think it's worth talking about as a greater example of one of the themes of the episode last week, like we were saying, that when you learn Spanish, you have to kind of reframe the way that you think about language, because Spanish has these two great words for expressing knowledge or familiarity, but you have to know when to be able to use both if you're going to communicate successfully. So let's review the use cases for each one. We talked about the verb conocer first, and we wrote out a little list for you of some of the key situations and examples that will help guide you when you're determining when to use conocer versus saber. So for conocer, it's easier for me to think about it with people as the objects, knowing people, being familiar with people, establishing contact or relationships with them, building familiarity, establishing familiarity, or even meeting people. So the act of meeting someone for the first time also uses the verb conocer. If yo conozco a mis vecinos, that can mean both I know my neighbors, but also I meet my neighbors. So conocer has the underlying theme of people. That's the best way that I can think to explain it and to remember it as a native English speaker learning Spanish. If you think about it in a very interpersonal way, one person meeting another, one person being familiar with another, or having contact with another, that is the most helpful way that I can think to explain it. But also, as you saw in the example, nosotros conocemos la ciudad muy bien, we know the city very well. The object doesn't have to actually be a person or a group of people. It can be a place or something that you're familiar with that has like a special connection to you, a relationship with you that is more than just knowledge-based or more than just factual. So on the other side, we'll switch to saber and we'll see that it is much more factual oriented, knowledge-based. It's about possessing skills, possessing knowledge, information. So it seems more cut and dried. It seems maybe more, I want to say mathematical, but it doesn't have to at all relate to science or math. It can just be about general knowledge or something, some idea that you have in your mind, skills. As we saw in the example sentence, sabemos nadar, we know how to swim. It's the perfect verb to use when you're explaining how to do something or possessing the knowledge or the skills to do something.
Yeah, that's a great recap. Just also, it is also very important to say that we can use the verb saber to express that you can speak a language, actually. So you can say in Spanish, sé español, I know how to speak Spanish, say English, etc. So it's also very, very useful. And therefore, I think we are just ready to get a quick recap also on the verb forms, because as we mentioned, these are both regular verbs with the special characteristic that it is only irregular when you use it with yo. So the other forms are regular. Don't worry about that. We will have a look at this here, as we can see. Do you remember how to say conocer when you use the verb, the personal pronoun yo? Here it is. Yo conozco. So it's very, very regular. Yo conozco. As we see here, the verb ends in o, which is also a general remark also for all verbs when we conjugate them for the first person singular, yo. But all other forms, tú conoces, él, ella conoce, nosotros, nosotras conocemos. If you are learning European Spanish, then you need vosotros, vosotras, conocéis, and ellos, ellas conocen. So as we just heard, the verb is very, very regular. It's only irregular for the first person singular. And the same also happens with the verb saber. So the verb saber has also the irregular form yo sé, but all other forms are regular. Tú sabes español. Mi hermano sabe inglés. And then we use the verb with nosotros to say sabemos nadar. If you are learning again Spanish from Spain, then you will need the form for vosotros, vosotras, which is sabéis, sabéis la respuesta. And for ellos, ellas, it's also very simple, and ustedes, which is saben. So this is also a quick review of all the forms of saber and conocer. And I hope this is clear for you. All these verb forms are in present. So I think, and we guess you are ready to use both verbs in the right situations, in the right contexts.
Very good explanation, David. One point that I will add is that because the conjugations, the verb forms of both verbs are regular except in the yo form, that means that if you know how to conjugate verbs or to attach regular verb endings for verbs that end in er, like saber and conocer, or comer, to eat, for example, then you're already well on your way to being able to use these verbs. And you only have to remember that there are special cases for the yo forms. And you might be tempted to say, oh, I know that to conjugate a regular verb in the yo form, I take off the ending er or ar or ir and I add o. So you might be confused and say, oh, well, sometimes I might say yo sabo and I might get tripped up. But you'll realize that as you speak Spanish and practice with native speakers or a teacher, or you use an app like Babbel, or you listen to Spanish dialogue on TV, you'll realize that you only hear them saying yo sé. So once you have more practice using the form, it'll become like second nature to you. You won't even think yo sabo, or you won't think of the irregular, you won't think that you're using an irregular form just because you'll always say yo sé la respuesta or whatever you're going to say. So it becomes a lot more common to think about.
Yeah, you're right, David. I also like to say that when little children are also learning how, Spanish, native speakers, these children also say yo sabo. So they know that they don't know that it's a verb, but they know that in the case when they know something, they say sabo, and they start just saying say from a certain point in life, which is great. So I'm just saying this happens also to native speakers, to little children, and this is also a very cute mistake. So it is always I don't know, cute to hear how people say yo sabo, but now you know that the verb conjugation for saber is yo sé for the first person.
Okay.
Cool. And I think we are ready for some questions. Please remember that you can also post your questions here, and we can pick some of them and talk about them. We would be very, very glad. And
if you have questions too that you think of after this broadcast, feel free to comment and we'll follow up and try to answer as many as we can. And we'll also try to address any comments or questions that you have in upcoming episodes and broadcasts that we do. So don't feel like you have to come up with a question right now. If you're not sure what you want to ask or how to ask it, you can circle back and comment something later as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think while questions keep coming up, we can also talk a little bit about the verbs creer and pensar, because this was also one of the questions that we got last week, and we thought it would be also nice to say some words about that, because so far I think we've been talking about differences between both languages, being two different systems. But I think as for the case of pensar and creer, we do have also similarities there. So we have also like an equivalence for the verb creer, which is translated into English with the verb to believe, and for the verb pensar, how do we say pensar in English? This is to think. So both verbs, to think and to believe, are used in the same way as in Spanish when we say creer and pensar. So you can also start a sentence with I believe that, then you say creo que, or pienso que, just to say I think that. It is basically the same. So to express opinions, we can use both verbs. And I think there is no major difficulty in that group of verbs.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the areas of Spanish where you actually can map one English word to one Spanish translation. Unlike with saber and conocer, meaning to know. If you want to express believe, I believe, you say yo creo. If you want to say I think, you say yo pienso. So that's actually a very direct translation, which makes it easier for learners of Spanish to understand the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question from Jennifer, and she asks, is there a difference between saying sé or yo lo sé? So in this case, it actually, with the word lo that you see in yo lo sé, that is what we call an object pronoun, and we can talk more about these at another time because there's so much we could say about object pronouns. But when you see this word lo, or sometimes it appears as la or los or las before a verb like say that's conjugated, that means it or them. So in most cases, that's the easiest way to explain it. So if you were to say yo lo sé, you're essentially saying I know it, and it would be referring to something that is clear to the listener that has been explained before. So the context might tell you that yo lo sé is referring to it would have to be a masculine, a singular masculine object, of which I can't think of an example right now. Yo sé.
No, but I think in general, David, sorry to jump in here,
No, please.
because yo lo sé means basically I know that actually, or I know it. So it's something that it was also clearly expressed before. So I just say I know that. Yes, I know that. Yeah, sí, lo sé. Sí, yo lo sé. Whereas when we use sé, only for sé, this is just when we say I know. So it is possible to say in English, yes, I know. In Spanish, we use verbs generally also with the complement, with extra information that we need in order to give this verb a meaning. So if you say sé, only sé, Spanish speakers will just think, oh, something is missing. So make sure that when you use sé, you say something else like lo sé, because it has a meaning. I know that. Or sé que estás enferma. I know that you are sick, for example. So in this case, lo sé is a perfect sentence in Spanish, and sé is a sentence, it's a verb that needs something else in order to have a meaning. And as David was also explaining, you can also say, I don't know, you can also use lo as an object pronoun, which refers to a masculine noun, to say, for example, I don't know, the contract, which is el contrato in Spanish. Then you can say, I know that. Yeah. I think yo lo sé, it's more like I know it, I know that. Yeah.
That was a great explanation, and you filled in the gaps where I was struggling. Thank you, David. Let's look for some more questions. Let's see. So Michael had a clarification, and he said, you use conocer with regards to cities too, is that right? And I would say, in the example that we gave earlier, that was right. We were using conocer in the example sentence, sabemos la ciudad muy bien, or we know the city very well, to express familiarity. So if you are familiar with whether it's a city, a country, a restaurant, a place of business, something that you frequent a lot and you have a personal relationship with, that's the perfect example of when to use conocer in that context. So that's, I would say for the most part, yes, you can use conocer with regards to cities. And I'll pull up this example that we said earlier. Anything else to add to that, David?
Yes, I think you captured it also very well. It is about being familiar with something. And I can also be familiar with a place or also with a concept, or it is just this meaning of familiarity, like feeling close to something, like in this case, knowing little details. So that's why we use also cities in this sample, because I'm familiar with a city. Yeah.
Great.
And I see also some questions and comments regarding pronouns, indirect and direct pronouns, and also a similar question regarding los and las for them instead of ellos and ellas. Maybe we can just shortly say something about them. This is also a very, very complicated topic. It's also it requires more time for us to explain it. So maybe we can also take this as an inspiration for the next session. But I think we'll come back to this topic sooner or later.
Yeah, there's a lot that we could say about this, and it's good that you all were listening because I would have questions too. And I think that this is great inspiration for a new topic. So thank you for submitting these questions that you have. I think before we go, we should do two things, David. We should ask our viewers a couple of questions to see how much they learned from this broadcast about the uses of Saber and Conocer in different example contexts. And we should also talk a bit about pronunciation, which is a huge topic that we could spend hours and hours on in a different broadcast. But I think it's always something that people like to take with them when they learn Spanish is key facts and anecdotes about how to pronounce certain words, because there are different pronunciation differences that exist across regional varieties of Spanish. And we heard that from the last episode too, that you all wanted to hear some about pronunciation. So let's briefly touch on that. If you have questions too, we can address them in later episodes or follow up with you on Facebook. But before we go, we'll do those two things. We'll leave you with some questions to answer, and then we'll also touch on pronunciation a bit. So before we get to pronunciation, let's post the questions, the example sentences that we wrote, and see if our viewers have been paying attention and can see and what context they'll use Saber and Conocer.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think we shall start with the first sentence that we got here, which is Paul y yo. And then we need to fill the gap with the verb saber or conocer. So Paul and I, this is we. So how do we conjugate the verb conocer and saber for nosotros, nosotras? Exactly, it's conocemos and sabemos. So now we ask you, what do you think is the right verb here?
I see a lot of good responses coming in.
This is amazing. So we see so what do you think, David? You can tell them the right answer.
The correct answer is, I see this from a lot of people. I'll just choose one at random. Sabemos. Because if you remember, we talked about saber referring to knowledge or information or skills. And David mentioned that you can use the verb saber to talk about the languages that you know as well. So if you say, yo sé español, I know Spanish. Yo sé francés, I know French. So in this case, Paul y yo, that's we. So it would take the form nosotros. Communication would be sabemos. Nosotros sabemos. Paul y yo sabemos inglés y francés.
That's great. That's great.
So now,
and I think we are ready for the second question, for the second sentence. So we have here tú, al profesor de español. So which verb should we use here? Saber or conocer? So just remember what the forms for tú are. They are regular. So in this case, we say either sabes or conoces. What would be the right answer?
You people are good.
Yeah,
Lots of great answers coming in. You've been paying attention.
that's great.
Okay, I think we're ready to reveal the answer. It looks like I think almost everyone got it right. So the answer is conoces. So as we mentioned, conocer are used for relationships with people, familiarity with people or concepts or ideas. In this case, it's a person, el profesor. And if you look carefully, you'll see in the example we posted, you see al profesor instead of el profesor, and that's because, as we briefly mentioned earlier, this little verb, it's not a verb, word it's a little personal marker, and it means that you're going to be referring to a person as the object of the verb. That's something we can talk about later, but when you see a and el together, so a el profesor, you combine them to make al. So the correct answer, as we mentioned, is conoces al profesor de español. Very good work, everyone. Very good work.
That's great. Yeah, amazing. So, what do you think, David? Do we have also some minutes to talk a little bit about pronunciation?
I think let's talk about it for 2 minutes and
for
leave our viewers with something a little bit different.
That's a challenge, but I accept it. So I wanted to say something briefly about the sounds y in Spanish. So let's remember how we introduce ourselves in Spanish when we say what our names are. So let me post here an example. I did a mistake here. So if I want to say my name is John, I'm gonna post this here. Yo me llamo John. So as we can see there, we have a Y in yo, I. Me llamo John. Me llamo comes from the verb llamarse, which literally means to be called oneself. So I like this example because we have both the Y and the double L sounds in Spanish, which tend to be the same across all Spanish-speaking countries. But as David was mentioning before, there are some regional differences, varieties. So you might already have heard different pronunciations of yo. For instance, there is yo. There is also a different way to pronounce it, especially in Argentina, in Uruguay, and in regions nearby, which is yo. And I wanted just to say that it is okay to say yo, yo. This belongs to different regions where this sound is pronounced like this. The most typical one is yo, the most common one, and I think due to the high number of people, Spanish speakers coming from South America, from Central America, from Mexico, I guess you have already heard that yo is the most common sound you hear. But both the Y and the double L tend to be pronounced in a similar way. In some regions, they have a slightly different variation in the sound, but don't worry about that. I think it's okay when you stick with a way to pronounce it. So yo me llamo John, and I use the name John just to remind you of the pronunciation of the J for John, because it's also it's very similar to the pronunciation of yo and llamo in that sample, in the example sentence. So yo me llamo John. If I were from Argentina, I would say yo me llamo Sean, which is also a very particular way to pronounce the sound in Argentina, and this is also a way to recognize people coming from the area, not from Argentina, but from Buenos Aires and from Uruguay. So it's really interesting also to learn more about that. And if you are also curious and you want to know more, let us know via comment, and then we can also explain furthermore pronunciation rules in Spanish and differences in the different countries.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. And I hope that it left you, our viewers, with something that you can take with you. If you are curious, before we sign off, if you're curious about language learning or you want more tips and strategies and resources to keep you going until our next episode, you're in luck because we have a whole lot of resources, social media channels to direct you to where we can answer more questions about Spanish or any other language that you're learning. So the first link that I'll share is to Babbel magazine, where we have thousands of articles of everything you could want about learning the languages that Babbel offers, and more world languages, just stats and facts and tips and tricks about learning, cool anecdotes and stories. Lots of stuff about Spanish in there too, so I'll post that link for you. And then feel free to follow us on our social media channels. So to find us on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, you'll just use the handle Babbel USA, which I'll post here as well. And then you're already on Facebook if you're watching this video, so you know where to find us on Facebook. But you also might want to check out our space on Quora, which is the popular question and answer website. We have a forum called Everything Language, and I'll drop the link as well. But it's a great place to post your questions and get answers and submit content, interact with other language learners to learn more about Spanish or just language learning in general. And it's a really wonderful resource. So I will post that here as well. So we just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
And David, let's not forget the survey, because that is also very helpful. Please let us know what you think about this session and what are your wishes as well for topics and so on. This is the link to the survey. Don't forget it, and we will be also very glad to see what you think.
That's right. And be sure to tune in next week. We will have another broadcast at the same time. That's going to be Tuesday, May the 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So it's the same exact time as today, just a week from now. So we are excited to see you then. And we will leave you with one question based on our lesson today. And we'll give you the answer next week. It has to do with Saber and Conocer. And David's going to post the example sentence right now. But basically, think about what we said today, about the lessons that we gave, and then next week we will come back with the answer to see if you were paying attention.
And this is the sentence. So looking forward to next Tuesday.
All right, everyone. Thanks again. And we'll see you next week.
See you.
Bye.